corn cultivation, you're going to spread development, social diversification will happen, because when you're a settled environment, you can then socially diversify. That's all of these groups. Part B.
Buddy in green. Sit on my lap.
All right, part B. You're not kicked out of IB yet. Society responded to the Great Basin. So the first one was maize, corn in the southwest. The next one's the Great Basin, the Great Plains, what's happening there as well. They have those two areas. And the last one is the northeast Mississippi River Valley and this Atlantic seaboard. So looking at these things, selling a permanent village, the words I've written are the answers to those questions. So if you were to turn those into questions, these are your supporting answers. Does that make sense, how this document is structured? Any questions on either the question portion, or you want me to explain what the answers that I've written down are? The question is how the environment, how the natives adapted to the environment, using agriculture, how their social structure settled, and how they created diverse societies. Yes?
What's underneath that? What does that say?
Inca? Matriarchal society, patriarchal society. So some of the indigenous tribes were matriarchal, which means the women were in charge, and some of them were patriarchal, which means the men were in charge. Question? Yes?
Before and after this, we are...
Pueblo. That's where they carved out the rough structures out of the caves, out of the sides of cliffs. The southwest is really, really dry. They carved pueblos inside of the cliffs. Other questions? Yes? For C? So this area settled along the Atlantic seaboard, mixed agriculture, so they use all sorts of different agriculture. They use what they call three sister farming: maize, corn, beans, and squash. Maize, which is corn, beans and squash, maize, beans, and squash. And so the stalk would support the bean stalks and the wrapping around it. So they kind of put all three together. That's their mixed agriculture. These are the tribes that were in this area getting along. So these two used agriculture, but also supplanted that with hunting. Of course, as we know, our Calusa didn't do any of that. They just farmed the sea. They roped off the ocean. They pushed all the fish up into an estuary, put a fence across it, basically a net, and then they were able to pull the fish out whenever they needed them. And they do it again and again and again. They supplanted it with shellfish and a little bit of hunting. Any other questions here? Yeah.
What's the one next to Uruguay's?
The Iroquois? Where at? At the bottom?
Yeah, the Huron.
The Hurons. Huron are up in the north, near Canada. That's where Hurons say they come from, that native, that would have been that area. Any questions before we move on to the next one? Okay, moving on to the next one. Now the next one's changing key concept, because time period 1 and 2 are fairly short, fairly brief. This one's the shortest of them. And so we're already into point 2. Sometimes you'll see that it just continues the same concept, but now we've changed gears to a completely different concept. Now we're looking at how Europeans, natives, and Africans resulted in the Columbian Exchange, and they had cultural, social, and political changes on both sides of the Atlantic. So this is the impact of the Columbian Exchange. What extent was the impact of the Columbian Exchange? European expansion into the Western Hemisphere generated social, religious, political, economic competition and changes within societies. It's how these two major cultures are clashing together and how they're fitting together as well. So if we look at A, we're talking about the 3 G's of exploration here. European nations wanted to conquer, look for wealth, economic competition, military competition, and spreading Christianity. So our 3 G's there. The Columbian Exchange, new crops to Europe from the Americas, stimulating population growth. And then you have new mineral wealth, which shifts European from feudalism to capitalism. Also destroys the Spanish economy, but you guys know that from world history. And the last one, improvements in maritime or seagoing technology allows for better methods of trade, like the joint stock company, which is a company where you don't have to put all of your money, you put some money along with other investors to make that money back. Questions here? Yes?
Was it Self-Levita or De Las Casas that like wanted more rights in the?
Which one was it?
De Las
De Las
Casas.
Casas is the nice guy. Sepulveda is more of the, maybe you think of Sepulveda as like serpent or something. That's what he thought of the natives. Stomp the serpent to death, you could kill him. Our first debate. Oh, we're doing our last debate tomorrow. Last two. That's it. On the board. All done. Any other questions here? All right, moving on to the next one. Nobody has any questions here?
The maritime technology, what are you using exactly?
The caravel. Like,
So,
I know,
South
apparently you know that is, but the
Native
the
Americans
faster vessel, they could sail against the
how they
wind.
were adapted.
All right, so now we're staying in same one, because this is a bigger concept. This, European, the Columbian Exchange and the interaction of all the cultures is a bigger concept. And so here you also have the Africans coming in as well. They have to have their here too. Columbian Exchange, the Spanish Empire, economic, demographic, and social changes. Exploration caused deadly diseases and epidemics. The introduction of crops and animals not found in the Americas. The encomendia system, which used labor, native labor, and plantation-based agriculture, also mining and exploitative practices. And then the last one, European traders partnered with some West African groups who practiced slavery. So now we're bringing in the slaves to replace the indigenous workers who were dying off to do agriculture and mining. So an easy essay question, a question, of course, could be, what was the impact of the encomendia system on the native populations and African populations to some extent? I mean, it's a pretty straightforward question. Questions on these? Here. Yes.
I like the Enconda system work again.
So the idea was that the natives would be protected. This is how the Spanish justified it themselves. They would protect them and give them religion, right? Save their heathen souls. In exchange for that, they would, and they would, house and feed them. In exchange for that, they would do all of the labor for the Spanish. It usually devolved into just a strictly exploitative labor-based practice. But very minimal stuff given to like saving their heathen souls and whatnot. That's when you get the rise of De Las Casas and Sepulveda arguing it out in real time over in Spain. And those things were published, became known as the Black Record or the Black Legend. And other nations were like, Spain is evil. Look at what they do to these people. Well, the other countries are just as evil and just as nasty. They just didn't write it down and have a debate about it. So they just kind of hid that away. Oh, we're not bad. See, we didn't write that stuff down. Yeah. Absolutely. And we go to D in a second. Nobody got any questions on A through C? There's a lot there. Have you noticed any of the same terms? If you notice the same terms, that means one answer can suffice for a lot of different questions and fill in a lot of different gaps. So make sure you know enough about that to write about those. But again, this is only 5% of the test. The first whole day, today is only 5%. Smaller portion. Let's move down to D. The system that the Spanish developed, that caste system, right? It had diverse populations, Europeans, Africans, natives, but they were very hierarchical. So at the very top of the scale would be the Peninsulares, the people who come from Spain. They're the ones who are going to rule the society. Then the newborn, like people born here in this country, but to Spanish parents, and then you go down from there. Then you start mixing races. The mestizos were the mix of indigenous and European blood. Mulattoes were the mix of European blood and African ancestry. And then at the bottom you'd have just those two groups.
spread Catholicism?
Catholicism, ideally it would. And they did set up a series of missions as well, which then, like in Pope's Rebellion, they were extremely exploitive and brutal to those people until they had the uprising in Pope's Rebellion. They did try to spread, ideally, Catholicism, but not one person would do one thing, everything. If I'm over there and I have a plantation, I need the labor done. I don't really care about saving your soul. But if I'm on a mission, which they set up a whole series of missions in northern Florida that all got destroyed by Indians, natives later, then I was much more invested in trying to save you, although saving you is to beat you if you practice your own religion or your own cultural practices. So saving in my terms, not yours. So they would depend on the person, where the soldier would have no use for either of those things. He was just merely guarding and defending or attacking. Yes?
What was the mestizo?
That's a mix of native and European blood. What's that? Peninsula, right there at the very top. They're the people directly from Spain who rule the society. Two again still, 1.2. In their interactions, Europeans, natives asserted different divergent worldviews like about religion, gender roles, family use, land use, and power. And they didn't see eye to eye on all of these things. So when when the natives would talk about land use, they talked about using the land, and no one really owns the land. We just kind of, everyone owns it. We kind of share the land, and we use it for our practices when it suits us or whatnot. Whereas Europeans, land use was defined by owning that land. So they have a very different viewpoint on things. Misunderstandings are huge in this time period. They're rampant. Europeans don't really care to try and understand things. They just force their will on people. Their early action over time, Europeans and natives adopted some useful aspects of each other's culture, which was true. They would adopt what was useful to them. Like Europeans would adopt natives' farming practices. Natives would adopt the tools and implements of the Europeans. As European encroachment on native land demands on labor increased, native people sought to then defend themselves from and protect their own indigenous tribe or sovereignty away from those people and keep their own religious practices and those sorts of things. The concept of gender relations, diplomatic negotiations, and military resistance would happen. So this is when the conflicts all start in this time period. Like Pope's Rebellion. And then you have native contacts and Africans. There's a debate among the religious leaders of how non-Europeans should be treated. You have De Las Casas and Sepulveda coming out in that time period. Like Sepulveda obviously thought they were all savages, most of the natives. But De Las Casas thought, hey, we can convert and save the gentle souls that are the natives. But the Africans are less than human, let's use them. So even he wasn't really a great person. There's no real winners back here by our standards. Used for the subjugation of those groups. We're racially superior, they're not. So questions on these? Yes. The Black Legend, that's where De Las Casas and Sepulveda had debates. They put it into a book, and then that became known as the Black Legend. Like, they're bad people. Look at that. Yes. Tagalog is a language that's still spoken in the Sea Islands today. So to protect their own cultural identity, the Africans would use their own language and keep that with them. So it's a mix of African and indigenous and a little bit of English, and it's spoken in the Sea Islands. So they maintain their cultural autonomy by practicing their own language, which they still do today. Try and keep some semblance of yourself. Don't let them assimilate you into society. Any other terms up here? Yes. Which one? Oh, maroon communities. So the maroon communities are when Africans would run away, they could be easily marked. They could find them, right? They stand out pretty well. So they would go to the remote areas where the white people wouldn't go, usually into some kind of a swampy area or some kind of hard to get area that the white people wouldn't even bother chasing them. The nearest one to us is in the early 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, sets up just north of Bradenton. It was called Angola. It was probably there for about 50 years. And then Jackson comes in as, General Jackson is a state to subjugate the native population, and kind of take it away from the Spanish, and then that civilization disappeared. They recently found it about 5 years ago.
Wow.
Any other questions? Going down to maybe number 3. No, we're done with time period 1. Time period 1, like I said, is the fastest one. Time period 2 is gonna be a little bit longer.